So, before I can introduce my panelists, and I have to make sure that everybody is seen, it seems that we've got a very small table here, so I apologize for that. So, and I have to make sure that I don't fall off the stage. Maybe we can just start with introductions. Matt Gregory, founder and CEO of Oakham, on the end. Can you please introduce yourself and just say a little bit about your company?
Sure. We build a developer tool that makes it really easy for a developer with 1 or 2 lines of code to add an immutable identity to a connected device, and then anytime that device shares data with another device, that receiver knows that data came from that device. As this relates to blockchain, underneath our technology is a blockchain layer, and how it relates specifically to supply chain. Anytime you're dealing with converting the real world into digital information, you need to know where that data is originating and what device it's coming from. We solve that problem. We also have some use cases around manufacturing where a manufacturer might want to, as something's coming down the assembly line, create an attestation for that device, where they're putting in the firmware, the bill of materials, that they made it in a secure facility, like micro-SIMI type situations being avoided. So that's another use case for our technology and why it requires blockchain.
Thanks, Matt. So Gary Knights, Global Project Management Executive with Elimica. Gary, can you say a little bit about you and your company?
Sure. Thank you. My name's Gary Knights. I work.
I suggested, try to pull the mic through. Try to talk a little bit closer.
Thanks, Andy.
Elimica was founded in 2001 by large chemical companies and tire companies to automate their supply chains. What Elimica does is we do a lot of pretty heavy-duty SAP integration. We integrate with the Internet of Things, with carriers, customers, suppliers, et cetera, to help automate supply chain operations. We have about $500 billion worth of commerce flowing through our network each year, and we have over 10,000 partners on our network. And so our blockchain initiative, as a trusted partner of our clients, they are always looking to us to help evaluate new technologies. And so they asked us to use blockchain to automate some of the processes that we currently automate with existing technologies. And so we did a blockchain pilot, and we found a couple of things with that. I won't go into too much detail here, but one of the thoughts was that blockchain could eliminate a lot of the challenges of EDI, XML integration. We found it really didn't address that, but we did see some opportunities along the lines of lineage tracking, also smart contracts. And my space is in order to cash, and so the types of things we're thinking we could use blockchain for potentially would be automatically generating a payment based on certain events in the order to cash cycle being fulfilled.
Thanks, Gary. Next panelist is Ganesh Wadawadigi, Chief Solution Expert Blockchain for SAP. Go ahead, Ganesh. Please talk about your company and blockchain and introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah. Hello, everyone. I am in the digital supply chain solution go-to-market solution management team at SAP. SAP is, probably most of you are familiar with, is an enterprise software solution provider. We have solutions for about 25 different industries and all lines of businesses. And about 76% of the transactions worldwide, the revenue touches SAP systems. We provide digital transformation solutions for our customers in all these different industries to become an intelligent enterprise. There are several different components of our solution portfolio, from an intelligent core to data platform in the cloud, along with a set of intelligent technologies which we call SAP Leonardo. And under these, there are 6 different pillars: IoT, AI, machine learning, big data, blockchain is one of them. And we are working with several customers across multiple industries, and I'll talk more about that as we go along.
Thanks, Ganesh. So Jan-Erik Johansson, industry leader with Data Consultancy Services. When you go up next?
Yeah, my name is Jan-Erik Johansson. I'm an industry advisor for upstream oil and gas for TCS. My role is to look at where can blockchain be applied in oil and gas upstream. That said, TCS has already a large blockchain practice. We have about 300 practitioners of blockchain and about 100 engagements so far across the financial sectors, bank sectors, trading. In oil and gas, we're focused particularly on commodity trading, looking at how we can help people secure their trading activities. Also around supply chain, partially from the point of knowing the origin. We have seen that there have been coming increasingly amount of equipment coming into the supply chain that are, call it in a popular term these days, fake, and that they have been manufactured to look like the real thing, but they're not to the specification of the real thing. So there is a need for securing that you know where your sources are coming from, and tying that into smart contracts is one of the things that we're looking at.
Thanks, Jan-Erik. And finally, David Picciato, Digital Enterprise Industry Director from Siemens. David, please tell us about your background and your solutions in blockchain.
Sure. Thank you, Peter. So my background is truly deep in manufacturing execution systems. And the reason I'm here today is because we believe that there is also a tight integration and touch point between what happens in the plants and what happens in the supply chain. So Siemens has initially for our own manufacturing facilities starting to brainstorm a couple of years back on how to leverage blockchain to optimize its operations and its processes in the supply chain. So we started from there, and then we started to think a little bit outside of the box and think, okay, how can we help our own customers in that space? And this mix of OT and IT that we can now provide with our expertise in the plants, in the manufacturing floor, in data collection, leveraging our cloud infrastructure as well, we thought that it would be a perfect platform to launch an initiative around trusted traceability in food and beverage. So that's what my team has been mostly working on recently. From the initial times on MES only, now my focus is broadly around all the digital enterprise, so starting from PLM topics, MES topics, automation, and then cloud analytics and MindSphere on top. But specifically for blockchain, what we believe it's important is to understand how to cover these blind spots of the supply chain, so these gaps in the supply chain. We need truly to have a mix of intelligent and smart data collection, pre-processing, understanding what happens in these different nodes. So it's not only like movement of materials, but it's also processing of materials. And we've come up with an architecture that we'd like to share with the industry and understand together how to move forward with that. And obviously we are leveraging third-party blockchain platforms, as well as our own corporate technology team is starting to build up a more specific one for the industry.
Thanks, David. So maybe I'll ask one question before I open it up to the floor, because I'm sure you've got lots of questions. Want to make sure that all of your questions get answered. You are all selected because each of your respective companies are actively engaged in pilots across the industries that we know and love here at ARC. So my first question is given my very rudimentary technical description of what blockchain is across industry, what's really different about this? So for the attendees that are here today, do they have to staff up different skills, different teams, different partners? Does the technology landscape look completely different? Do they have to throw out applications and investments that they've already provided? So maybe this is just an open question I can start with for the panel if anybody would like to answer it.
I think I have a good answer for this. Actually, there's a commonality in what everyone on the panel talked about. If you go down to the root of what everyone was getting at, there's some sort of identifier or identity that people are tracking of devices, and it's all multi-party scenarios. Probably with all the noise that goes on with Bitcoin, there's a lot of stuff for everyone to unlearn. And the thing to put in that place is blockchain's killer feature, and that's identity. Like, people talk about the blocks and how it works, and people talk about that there's one application for it called Bitcoin, But the cool thing in the middle of that is the killer feature around identity. And as soon as you have you enter a multi-party situation, like you think of a device coming off a supply chain or out of a manufacturer, goes through a supply chain, it changes identity, as many times, over and over and over again as it moves through that supply chain. But if you can have a single identifier that can be shared regardless of all the permutations of how those parts can be coming out of a factory, or if you're in an IoT scenario where you have all the permutations and interconnections between devices, if you can have one identity, and it's more than just like assigning a random number or a random identifier to this, this goes back to, it's basically distributed PKI. So the identifier is a private key that's held in secret in that hardware, and only that device can prove that it is what it is. And what that means is you have this concept of a self-sovereign identity in a device. That identity is not assigned to it. It is the device can claim what it is and then prove that identity to anyone that interacts with it in perpetuity. And also, you then get this immutable record of any sort of transactions that device has had. So you can do who made it, firmware updates, who controlled it, who last switched it, and that can be in any sort of permission group you want. So I think that's a commonality about what I heard on the panel, and also I think it specifically asked your question you just asked.
Thanks.
So I'll come at it with a slightly different angle. So my role is in product management, and I'm looking at business problems and how do we solve them. So when I think of blockchain, I think of blockchain as another technology. It solves some problems. I spoke with one of our computer science experts, and he told me, how it solves this problem that, has been unsolvable for decades. How do you assure digital identity without a trusted third party? And but when I look at blockchain and then how to apply it, I think of it, it's just another technology like web services or APIs or XML or ERP or MRP. These are all just tools that we have in our toolbox. So I think we need to think about, okay, where's the best place to apply blockchain? And there's definitely a lot of places where it can be applied, especially with the Internet of Things and, edge. And in the case of supply chain automation, it helps assure the data that we're getting into the algorithms that we run. And it, like I said, and like we see with some of the cases that Peter had shown on the board, it can help with things like lineage tracking and smart contracts. So I think it's really just another tool in our toolbox. And when we did our pilot with blockchain, in terms of the resources needed, we used the same, we didn't hire any new people. We used the same software developers that we always use. And we teamed with vendors that are expert in blockchain, and we leverage their platform work. So you can use blockchain without having to recast your whole IT department.
That's a great answer.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, first of all, if you're interested in where SAP is going with blockchain, please send an email to blockchain@sap.com. It's open to everybody. And every quarter we have a call which fits the global time zones. And we update everybody as to where we are, what is the latest that SAP is doing on the blockchain topic. To Peter's question, our approach is two-pronged. One is a technology approach. The second one is a business use case approach. The technology approach is where we are actively participating in open standards. A lot of these all of the blockchain protocols are open standards. So we are on the governing body for Hyperledger, which is a open standards body for blockchain under the Linux Foundation. And our idea is to make sure that the standards are open, and we'll probably talk about later the problems that could come up with interoperability, et cetera, when you have multiple different protocols being used by different participants in the network. So from a use case perspective, blockchain is for use cases where there are multiple parties involved, multiple trading partners involved, and there's a lack of transparency, and usually lack of trust, and blockchain can help address those situations. So from a technology perspective, we've taken a very agnostic approach. We provide blockchain services on SAP Cloud Platform. Right now, our focus is on enterprise blockchains, which Peter described as the permission blockchains. Right now, we have protocols supporting Hyperledger, Quorum, and multi-chain. So depending on the business use case, you would have to use one or the other protocol. And we can get into some of the details later. And then we also provide capabilities to bring information on the blockchain back into your enterprise to combine with your enterprise data to do analytics, predictive analytics, machine learning, and those kind of advanced analytics tools to understand how you can make use of the blockchain data from the network. And the second part of the technology is we're building business-specific applications. So like an MES solution or an ERP solution, depending on the use case, for example, tracking product provenance could be to counter counterfeit items entering into your blockchain, depending on the different industries, or streamlining your food recall. So they will be building specific business applications that will be leveraging one or the other business protocol. And in the back end, for the enterprises to provide the data into the blockchain with the examples that were talked about, we'll provide APIs to be able to take that data into the blockchain application to be able to understand how the product is flowing, what are the different levels of certification that were introduced into the components that went into the product or the food ingredients, so that in case there is an issue, then you can very quickly figure out where things went wrong and how to address those situations. So very different use cases, finance, supply chain, international trade, in industries like pharmaceuticals, to manage counterfeit drugs from entering, prevent the counterfeit drugs from entering the supply chain, food safety, and things of that nature.
Thanks, Ganesh. Anyone else?
I'm just going to say that from an oil and gas perspective, now we are the largest customer of SAP, so I don't have to repeat that we're using large of SAP's solutions to implement blockchains for our customers. But one of the things that we see, the biggest opportunity in oil and gas, is one of the larger problems that has tracked us, actually has funded a lot of buildings down in the downtown Houston, which is joint venture accounting. And how do you track land management? How do you track contracts? And blockchain has the opportunity to solve those. Unfortunately, to make a large number of lawyers unemployed, but I'm pretty sure that's not anything that people mind. So I think it's one of the big opportunities that we see in oil and gas, apart from trading and the trading of commodities, which we are also involved in.
Something I would like to add to, coming back to the topic of the business requirements, because that's something that I'm facing a lot too. What I like in particular about what happened with blockchain in the past couple of years is that specifically, for example, for the food and beverage industry, it finally brought up topics that everybody knew that there were issues and everybody knew that they needed to be solved. And maybe there is a solution for them even without blockchain, but now finally everybody's talking about these issues and they're finally tackled seriously with initiatives. So we're talking with global brewers who want to try to get back and understanding why some glass bottles are faulty and understand why and what supplier is providing those, to like cosmetics companies that want to understand why some of their products are sold in retailers and they're not supposed to be sold there, or many other examples. Some of them we've seen that Peter has presented earlier, but these are really issues that need to be tackled, and blockchain is a way to solve them, and we believe it's really the right way in terms of traceability, really having a certain degree of certainty of these transactions, of changes, of movements, of processing of data, and finally having the right transparency. But regardless, what we are trying to do is put together an architecture which solves these issues with the combination of IT and OT, as I said before, regardless of the specific need of using blockchain. And again, talking to the industry and to end customers, one thing that has surfaced is we're not really sure if we are ready to send really all our information publicly available in the blockchain, because maybe our consumers are not ready to know exactly how much scrap there is in certain products. So yes, let's use it. Let's give a certain degree of transparency. Let's go there step by step. Let's at least let the consumers know where the materials come from. But let's do it in a gradual way. Let's do it with a combination of private data and public data. And I think this combination of IT, OT, and blockchain data structure, which is, as you said, provides identity, immutable, and transparency, is probably the right way to go.
Thanks, David. I'm sure you've got 100 questions about blockchain. Anybody have any questions for the panelists? You can certainly direct a question at an individual panelist, or you can ask the entire panelist to answer your question.
Hello, my name is Minkan Mak. I'm with SIG company in the food and beverage packaging industry. I actually have two questions which might be related to each other, and it's addressing the whole panel actually, because the questions are pretty general. My first question would be, what would be your advice how a company entering into blockchain should identify the most appropriate use cases? Meaning, how do you get from technology to business value? So is there a structured process, or are there specific drivers which would define the most appropriate business cases? Yeah, so that would be my question number one. And question number two would be, in most cases, blockchain is about exchanging information amongst partners, or actually allowing transactions between different partners. So how do you see any decision for a new entrant of whether to drive a certain initiative, meaning creating an ecosystem, versus waiting for partners in an existing, for example, amongst existing value chains, then to join actually existing blockchains? So that's essentially a question about timing, I guess. Yeah. So I guess those two questions may be interrelated, so it would be interesting to hear your comments. But Gary, perhaps you start, because you specifically touched upon the case of finding the business case.
Okay, thank you for that question. Your first question was about what advice do you have to companies to ID the best use cases for blockchain? So I'll answer that in two parts briefly. The first one is, I think, rather than going at it with a specific technology in mind, I think it's always good to just look at, like, okay, what are the top business problems that you have to solve, and figure out how to solve those, and then identify what's the appropriate technology. Now, if you had money, let's say, for a blockchain initiative, and someone said, okay, you have to do something in blockchain, I would look towards a problem where you had an issue related to partner identity, and you're not sure of the partner identity, and maybe go down that sort of track. Then related to allowing transactions between partners. So, Lemica has had a transaction processing network, to support intercompany transactions between SAP systems, Oracle systems, any kind of system you can imagine, transportation systems. And we've probably had over 1 billion transactions flow through our network, over the last, 19 years. Without using blockchain, and we haven't had any sort of issues with security. And when it comes to transacting documents and getting them to flow from one system into another and post hands-free, there's really, I'll simplify it and say there's two components to that. One is the security component, making sure that you're getting the data from who is supposed to be sending it and it's not being spoofed. Blockchain kind of addresses that, but there's other substitute technologies for that. The second part, and the harder part, is basically the data mapping. It's in these 5 fields in Oracle, it needs to go to these 3 fields in SAP. I call it ABC, you call it 1, 2, 3. So blockchain, our pilot found that blockchain does not address those types of topics. Blockchain is good at the metadata level. So maybe you could take a PDF document, grab a couple of metadata elements out of it, get a fingerprint, put that on the blockchain, and you know that when that document was transmitted, but it doesn't help with the interoperability aspect.
from an SAP perspective, we have a couple of constructs for our customers to work with us on the topic of blockchain. First of all, we have what we call as industry consortiums for blockchain. Right now, we have 3 industry consortiums. One is for high-tech industry. The second one is for pharmaceutical and life sciences. And the third one is for consumer products, agribusiness, and retail. And that's where your use case of food traceability, et cetera, falls in. And the construct here is that these customers of SAP come together with SAP, and we conduct workshops to brainstorm different business use cases where they have issues that can potentially be solved with blockchain. And so we go through these in day-long workshops and come up with the top ones that are top of the mind for majority of the companies that are in the room. Then to dig into it deeper, we provide design thinking sessions. If you're familiar with design thinking methodology, you start big and with blue sky kind of an approach, and then try to identify who the roles are, what are the care abouts, and so on and so forth. So all of this information, to engage in this, we have to sign a multilateral agreement with SAP and all the different participants. So all the information shared is available to everybody who is in the consortium. So you get to know not only your issues from your angle, but also from your peers in your industry and other use cases that potentially are applicable to you as well. And the second part is we have a co-innovation program where you sign an agreement with SAP. SAP provides free software, and we go through a proof of concept. We go through in a rapid prototyping phase. We build an application and basically look at what the solution would look like. And then we take that further to productize these solutions. So those are the path that we follow. As a result of this, we just released last month a solution for pharmaceutical industry to track counterfeit drugs from entering into the supply chain from a resale perspective. In a couple of months, we'll be releasing a solution for food traceability and recall for our consumer products solution industry customers. And apart from these, we also have other customers who already know this is how they want to use blockchain. They have their community of their trading partners involved. So we have a few initiatives going on. One of the customers is going to go live this month, very soon here. Basically, they're going to be tracking tuna that's caught from fishermen in Indonesia. And then consumers like you and I go to Whole Foods, we can scan a barcode and really know where it came from. And their goal is to promote sustainable fishing and fair trade. And there's a whole bunch of other things that they're looking at. So there are 2 different flavors of this. One is work with the industries to find out the use cases. The other one is, I know what I want to do. These are my trading partners. I want to build a solution.
Thanks, Ganesh.
So we have added the TCS solution, we call it a quartz solution in our blockchain. We have looked at it from another point of view too. We've started noticing that some companies want to do blockchain internally. They don't necessarily need to do a consortia, but they have internal supply chain, they have internal networks where they want to use to verify that their records are going across correctly, that to do gather information that they need to report to government, that these are coming from true sources within their organization, and it's verified when it gets reported upwards. We've also seen an increase in requests for actually providing blockchain as a service. So we've looked at blockchain solutions where we can host and run blockchain as a service for customers in case they do not want to go through the whole effort of building their own solutions and hosting their own blockchain network or blockchain, call it the hyperledger or networks. So that's another angle that we can take in providing that as a service rather than having you to build your own blockchain solution.
Quickly on the business case topic. So as I mentioned before, some of the issues that are surfacing, they have been identified already in the past. Maybe the investments have already been justified, but solutions have not been found. So they're easily to be justified investments which have a tangible impact on cost savings. At least this is the impression I'm getting out of like first conversation, but happy to like discuss it further with you off record.
Okay, maybe I can, does that answer your question okay? Okay. Here's another question I have. So the fact is, this is all new. I used the term pilots before. Maybe these aren't pilots, and I'm not really giving justice to what actually you're doing. But in terms of commercialization, with your respective companies, how close are you to launching full blockchain solutions that are readily available, fully commercialized? Can you comment on that, anyone?
Yeah, I guess so. We're a provider of this developer tools, and we are live as of today, and we have our solution. It went into market about 3 weeks ago. We're a startup, full disclosure, so we're just getting going with this. But we're a brand new company, going down this road of fixing this problem for developers. So we're ready to go.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so from an Alemica standpoint, I would break it down into two paths. My role is in product management, so I always look at what can we productize and roll out to the market as a product we can sell and resell over and over again. And so we're still evaluating the use cases for that. But like Matt said, we're in position if someone wants to do a custom blockchain pilot. We've done it. We have blockchain data, running on our network. So we're ready to go with any custom project that someone wants to do.
And I think from SAP, we got the same blend of offering. As I mentioned, we have the pharmaceutical solution that is available on the market. The reason for the prioritization of that was come November this year, FDA requires all the returned pharmaceutical drugs to the wholesalers before they are re-entered into the resale supply chain to be authenticated. So all the distributors need to be compliant with that FDA regulation. So that's what prompted those companies to look at blockchain. So that's available today. And as I mentioned, the farm to consumer solution will be available in May as early adoption. And then we're working with several other proof of concepts, identifying counterfeit chips in OEM products in high tech, international trade where you have products crossing country boundaries. There are multiple parties involved, a lot of manual processes and documents that go back and forth, and streamlining that process. We have use cases in utilities and all. Apart from the other customer that I've talked about on sustainable fishing, there is a consortium that is in place now in Southeast Asia. This is around sustainable palm oil farming. And that's, again, a compliance and regulation-driven requirement that the producers and NGOs are looking to use blockchain to be able to track the provenance of the palm oil. So that's another initiative that's underway.
Thanks, Ganesh.
Yeah, we have delivered a number of solutions already to some of the customers. One of the interesting cases are probably what we call it retirement benefits distribution, to verify the identity of people that has the money and deserves the money. Usually, most people like myself, I have to send my a document that I actually exist every year to my previous company so that I get paid my pension. This blockchain makes it a little easier because you are uniquely identified, that you have the right to it. The other thing is maybe more interesting for high-end retail, which was the little shoe company that decided their shoes were so valuable that they needed to verify that they were original. They decided to go with the blockchain solution. So if you buy one of their shoes, there's a little tag. You can log into their database and you can verify that you actually have a verified, authentic shoe. So there's a number of other solutions which are more in our industry, but I thought I'd bring some up that are a little unusual. But so there's a number of them that we have already made commercial and they're running in companies.
Back to the topic pilots, I think the key word here is pilot. So what we recommend to do usually is to sit together, understand few use cases, understand how, because until now, actually it's the use cases that have kind of to adapt to the blockchain platforms because of the nature and the entity that they are. So that's why we are investigating at the moment like different blockchain platforms. One, for example, is Substrate, which provide flexibility. So it's actually the platform to adapt to the use case instead of vice versa. So we need to probably, like, still, we really together need to go outside of this pilot state and understand how to move forward in a realistic way with blockchain.
Okay, thanks,
So
David.
I might actually have an insight to build on this. I think it's going to come real quick, though, and there's a reason why. This is a little bit about how modern software is being developed. My background, I came out of Microsoft's pivot to open source, and then left to go start this at Occam. But if you look at the way software is built right now, it's very much, like the platform as a service was basically, total failure in the cloud, from my opinion. Microsoft failed at it. I was at a company called Heroku. You started there, then you moved to AWS, and Google failed at it. Now everyone's doing infrastructure, right? So it's all about, like, modern software is being built in stacks where you're picking your best technology at every layer, and you go to the cloud to get the infrastructure. You get MongoDB. You throw in some blockchain, Redis, and you start building your stack. The cool thing about what's happening in blockchain, the way it's being built, it's using the most modern developer tools. So it's open source. It's available on GitHub. Like with our system, you write 2 lines of code and you can register a device. And then the way blockchains work, you're not running it on-prem. There's no infrastructure to set up. You're consuming it all as a service, like a serverless architecture. You're just calling functions. You pay for it in microtransactions, and a development team can rapid prototype in this stuff in like literally a matter of hours. And maybe they start off on their credit card, and then the pilot gets to some certain stage, and they go talk to one of you guys to go fund their project. But at that point, it's been prototyped, and you're off and going. So there's very, very little developer friction because of the way these new tools have been architected in this space, kind of broadly.
Thanks, Matt. I'm not allowed to ask 2 questions in a row. Gentleman at the back.
Dwayne Kitchen at Suncor. Got a question on, you mentioned the FDA regulation of pharmaceutical. Is there a worldwide standardization with blockchain currently, or is that a work in progress?
It's you're talking about standardization on the protocols?
Actually, I'm referring to standards in particular.
Yeah, that's work in progress. So,
Okay.
As Matthew mentioned, they're open source protocols. So Hyperledger is continuously developing their protocol. Quorum, which is a fork from Ethereum, that was developed by JP Morgan Chase. That's open source as well. More applicable for the finance industry because that's where it originated. Then there's multi-chain, which is a fork from Bitcoin. We have built some solutions on that. The difference between that and the others is it doesn't have smart contracts. So if you don't need to use smart contracts, then that might be the protocol. But these standards are developing as we speak, and I think that's a work in progress. Yeah.
Thank you.
So not to hog this topic, but I can actually pivot what I had previously said to, I don't know anything about pharmaceutical standards, but just standards in general. This is a great landing place for standards. Like, for example, there's a DID spec, decentralized identifiers, that is moving into this. And this specification has like 60 enterprises that are behind it to standardize identity and attestation of people, places, and things. And a lot of work with the W3C Foundation also around semantic web and basically having self-identifiable code. And all of these initiatives around standards are accelerated because there is actually a place for them to land. It's not like you have to, in the silo of your big company, come up with a standard and then get it enough usage, then try to go get 4 other companies. You can just, a governing body, or if it's something that is coming out of a corporation, they can come up with a standard. They realize that it's something that they need to have industry adoption. They can contribute it to the open source and get it into people's hands very quickly. And then, kind of at that point, just if it's useful, people will use it, and if the standard's not, then they won't. But that's another great area for where this can really quickly break down these barriers of getting these technologies or standards into people's hands.
Just on the topic of standards, not specific to blockchain, I'll actually take the counterpoint to that. Alemica, when we started, thought we could get everybody on the same data standard, and that would make interoperability between companies much easier. And we had probably about 20 major companies that all agreed to do this. Quickly, what we found was no one wants to apply, even if 2 companies use the exact same standard, or they use the same exact SAP version and same SAP IDOC, because of how they configure their SAP systems, their IDOCs actually have different data values in them, and they call things different things. So what we learned through our experience with integrating thousands and thousands of companies is actually, we went just the opposite way. We adopted a lack of standardization. And we architected our network to be able to basically take IDOCs directly out of SAP, take a direct Oracle feed, take direct feeds, and perform a network data synchronization at that level. Because getting companies to change what comes out of their systems natively into a standard format, even if they want to do it, they often make mistakes. So we actually have adapted to a standardless world. And we see every new standard that comes out actually increases the number of degrees of freedom that you have to handle, because no one's going to get on that new standard at the same time.
Okay, I'm going to ask another question here. And now, you're the experts, and I want you to bring me back if I'm taking this in a direction where you don't want it to go. So when I first started investigating blockchain, which wasn't very long ago, I thought, we're talking about open standard protocol for trusted records and identity, transactions, permissions, identity. It almost seems like this is a cybersecurity discussion. Okay, so day one we had several workshops and hundreds of people packed into sessions to talk about securing devices and securing laptops, securing PLCs, programmable logic controllers. Is there an avenue of blockchain that is not just at the supply chain visibility level? Do you think this blockchain can actually be embedded at the device level in the future or this year? What do you think about that?
That's actually exactly what we do. Yeah, so our technology, you can put a private key into hardware, and that device can serve as a service-oriented architecture. We call it trust-oriented architecture. Can serve that identity to any other device, and then sign data that comes out of it. So, there's a bunch of people kind of working in this area on different tasks.
Okay, so this is really another use case, and I didn't want to take this in another direction, but so cybersecurity is another aspect at whether you're securing the lock on the door of your home or a building, or access to a programmable logic controller in a plant. This is another application for blockchain.
Yeah, and basically here's how it works. And I'll actually start with Bitcoin, right? If you have the cool thing about Bitcoin, the way it works, you don't have to have anyone in the middle. You can have 2 people, and they own a certain asset, and you can transfer it from this thing to that thing. I literally just described data going between PLCs and SAP systems or whatever it is, right? So the ability to transfer something of value, data in this case, between 2 devices, and them to be able to know that they are transferring it to that device and this is kind of where I go, the killer feature of blockchain is identity, because that's where it all starts. So once you have identity, then you can figure out how those identities can trust each other. Then you can figure out interoperability on top of that. So any sort of command and control, any sort of firmware updates, that covers a lot of security. So I would kind of describe it as security is one of the benefits, but instead of taking an approach that you're locking something down to keep things out, it's just a lot easier just to trust because you are certain that one server or application or device is talking to another. And actually, there's a great project that Microsoft is working on around human identity in this space that I encourage everyone to go look up. It's super cool. It's like a Satya level initiative.
Yeah, I think that we see the identity, and particularly carrying when you are in multiple areas. In oil and gas, safety is one big issue, and one of the things you have to be certified for a number of tasks you can do. After the big accident in the Gulf of Mexico, the government now requires that you are certified for the task you're supposed to do when you go offshore to the platform, not just that you have done the safety training. If you're a welder, you have to be certified to perform that weld on that particular platform. And it has to be done. If you're doing it for Shell one day and for Chevron the another, both have to certify you that you can do that. Today they are pretty cumbersome because you have to carry multiple certification from multiple companies. We see that the identity management becomes a very strong case for this. And I think the other thing we talked about before we started here was some car manufacturers, particularly one of the high-end ones in Porsche, have decided to use blockchain as a way to communicate to driverless cars from the center, so that they ensure that the communication from the center that gets to the car that contains the command to what to do next is actually authenticated and identified and comes from a true identity. So it's interesting that blockchain is actually potentially becoming a transmission type security protocol.
Yeah, and I agree with the security, exactly as you pointed out. And I think one of my observations with blockchain and Bitcoin, if you think about the data that is transferred in a Bitcoin, it's basically two data values. It's a number and a unit of measure. You know, it's basically $100, and that's pretty much it. And sometimes I think people thought that because blockchain works well because Bitcoin works that way, that blockchain could then be applied to any type of complex data transfer. But one of the problems, if you're dealing with like a 1,000 line purchase order that has, product descriptions and all these different data elements, blockchain doesn't address those data elements getting from one system to another. So I think that's the part that blockchain doesn't do well, but blockchain is excellent for the digital security.
All I wanted to add to Ian's point before is cybersecurity, blockchain, together, lots of good reasons without compromising too much speed of accessing data and so on. So that's like what needs to be probably investigated at this point.
Any other questions? Yeah, Kasem.
Yeah. Hi, thank you, gentlemen. Very productive conversation. My name is Kasem Karbat. I'm with Saudi Aramco Oil and Gas Company. We are working actively in the blockchain space, and we have multiple partners. We have done the exercise of going across the company to look for high-value use cases that we can do blockchain in. However, one of my observations is that blockchain is sky is the limit. You can do a lot, but you need those partners with you to be ready as well, right? And this is an issue if you, in your space or in your industry, if you're trying to roll out solutions that's multi-partner, it has to be. Otherwise, you can do it just with an interface. And those partners are not ready. What do? This, to me, can be a major killer for blockchain. You have all these great ideas. You can do a lot with it. But you're interacting with the government, you're interacting with organizations, other companies, whatever. They're not profit-based, some of them. They're not driven by the same motivations as you are, efficiency, visibility, whatever. How do you get everybody to be on the same side?
Yeah, that's a good question. It comes down to sharing information, and if you spread your spectrum far enough from an end-to-end perspective, all the multiple tiers of the supply chain, as you go more and more upstream, you need the data from them, but they don't need the data from you, all right? So So we are discussing this specifically in the food recall and food quality discussions with our customers, and it's a work in progress right now for this particular scenario where we are looking at how do you incentivize the different parties to participate, right? So maybe the consuming company has high stakes for having that data. So they pay for those participants who are going to put the data on the blockchain. Just as an example. For example, I'm a food manufacturer. I have to make sure that if there is any issue in my entire end-to-end supply chain, and I'm liable for that, so I am highly incentivized to get all the data. But a farmer, I mean, he could care less. So, but if there are situations where you can incentivize for fair trade or sustainability, they may be willing to put the data for a small cost. So those are some commercial discussions that we are having with our customers, and nothing really concrete yet, but that's definitely one of the hurdles that need to be overcome, depending on the industry and the use case. And the other thing is that we come across is, even though they are willing to participate, the discussion comes down to what am I going to share? So in the food industry, they don't want to share their recipe, even though the recipe ingredients are the ones which probably are contaminated, so you can really pinpoint what went wrong with what ingredients. So those are some other discussions that come up that we've seen, and but yeah, it's use case by use case, industry by industry discussion.
I think it comes back a little bit to the discussion we had here with Peter in the room next door in the previous session. Change management is a big part. Answers the question, what's in it for me? If you can't answer that for all the parties, he's going to have a really hard time implementing it. So I think that's I don't have a, what do you call it, rabbit out of my hat to do that, but it's just a process to go through the change management and trying to figure out what's in it for the various parties.
With all the issues that I agree with in food companies, for example, sharing like information and so on, but I think like building up a community is probably the way forward, or one of the way forwards. We tried to do it in the past with other topics, and it worked quite well. I know, for example, as an example, edible oils companies are coming together to discuss specifically these topics, so they've overcome a little bit some of the hurdles of like protection of their information and so on, because they realized we do have common issues, we do have common problems. We are all like suppliers and consumers of each other. Let's try to find a way together to solve it and use blockchain as like the topic that we need to investigate. So that's how I would like suggest to proceed anyway.
Okay. Other questions from the audience? Okay, I think we've got it. Oh, one more, right at the very back, gentlemen.
Colin Inslee with Hitachi Vantara. I'm not as technically savvy about blockchain, so this is maybe you'll just say it's not an issue, but I've heard that with the public and private sort of discussion around different blockchains, you can have a public blockchain, you can private, that you can, especially in the private version, you can have people join, but then the question comes up, if people then leave and then want to come back and actually participate, there's a challenge there in terms of the immutable ledger, and then basically breaking that chain, and then people coming back into it. But I don't know whether, maybe that is not an issue, but I've heard that could be an issue. Does that make sense?
I'm not aware of that specifically being an issue. Like one issue we've seen that's sort of related to that might be, let's say you pass an invoice document through and it has, and it's incorrect, and then you want to reverse the invoice somehow. How do you go ahead and undo a document that is passed through?
Right.
And
And that's an issue.
That's still an open question that we have. I don't know if anyone's solved that.
Yeah, that's sort of that's the basic premise, basically.
So that specific problem, you would, let's say you wrote something that was incorrect, you would that just rewrite. So there's like, in the like create, read, update, delete, CRUD format of dealing with databases, there's no real update. So, but which is actually a feature, this kind of goes back to picking, there's the earlier question around, get the technology, like do the other way around, find a problem and then figure out what tool. One of the benefits of blockchain is there is no update. So what you end up doing is you write something, let's say it's incorrect or needs to be updated, you then write it again, and then you have a record of 5 days ago it was written, today it was written, today is the correct version. So that's basically how you get around that, and that's either a feature or a bug depending on what application you're working on, right? It's sometimes that's like that's a great thing, right? And that's one of the benefits. So.
Any other questions? Oh,
Just one thing to add on this, but I know where you're going to is like the way we all should be, and I think your answer is really pointing in that direction. But it's truly this mix of private and public data that needs to be investigated further, because as I was mentioning before, maybe the reality is we need to like compromise on certain things and have a set of data which is still private and give the industry and the customers the possibility to choose what is the data that needs to be public versus private. And if this is enabled, then possibilities of like re-editing things are kind of allowed within the boundaries of what regulations and standards need to be. And this also comes back to the previous point. So there is a thin line that needs to be investigated there.
So on this topic, the encryption is still a thing, and the way people encrypt data for only certain recipients, where you have to have the private key. Basically, you would send someone you could write a message, and you could say, "I know who's supposed to get this because I know their public key, and the only way you can unlock that is with the private key." So then you can get around that. So it's basically I just described how HTTPS works. Like every website that we ever use uses this, and why you can bank online. So that method is still there.
I think also you can remember what you're pointing out, that there is also a widening gulf between U.S. and Europe in terms of what is allowed to be collected and not collected in terms of data. So going forward, we have to be very sensitive. If you're building a cross-Atlantic solution, what data can you contain, what data can you keep? And that has to come into the discussion of what can we put in the records of the blockchain. Can it be there temporary? Can it be kept? And to your point, if I put that in a document that you have to keep going on forward, if the person leaves and comes back, what data am I allowed to retain? How does he come back into it? It's going to become a critical issue to look at as well.
okay, so one question. The next 12 months at ARC, we're going to have another session on blockchain. What's going to happen in the next 12 months? What do you expect there will be for developments, or is it we're really just going to start to see exponential growth in applications?
So we have roadmap plans to release certain solutions in blockchain this year. So the one I mentioned is coming in May, and then we plan to have one or two more solutions. It's all under discussion right now. And we're just talking supply chain right now, but we are also looking at other use cases from personal identification to finance. There are a lot of use cases in finance, and if not this year, maybe next year, we see the intersection of these different use cases. For example, if you're talking about international trade, yes, you have the buyer, you have the consignee, you have the seller, you have the consignee, you have freight forwarders and customs and all involved. End of the day, you need to settle the trade. So there are financial use cases that can be used from a blockchain perspective in reducing day sales outstanding, preventing supplier payment frauds, and a lot of different use cases that we are looking at. So we are looking at continuing to work with our customers to look at more of these use cases, build proof of concepts, and then have some live customers. The first one coming up later this month.
Okay, thanks, Ganesh.
I think that I was here for last year's, and I think that we were talking more at the technical level. Today we have lots of things going on. You had a little picture up there about moving up the curve. I think we're going to crossing the chasm, and I think you'll start seeing some real implementations. They might not be huge, but they'll be real functional presentations. I think the one that's pretty far ahead is the one that you mentioned in the North Sea, the trading system for commodities. That is going to expand. We know that both large companies like Shell and are looking at a complete new trading system on a global basis to be based on this. So I think we're pretty much on the cusp, and I think we'll start seeing some real use cases next year.
Thanks, Jan Erik.
Maybe one thing, I think in 1 year here, you'll probably have many more sessions about this topic, number one. And number two, things are moving really fast. And like just to give everybody an example, in Hanover, the large industrial trade show, Siemens will have a dedicated area of the huge booth that we have there to traceability. And the reason why I'm mentioning it, besides to let you know, is because for Siemens, this is a big thing. I mean, usually we kind of move a little bit slower in certain directions, but the fact that we are dedicating an area to this topic is because we are really detecting a lot of attention. All of this said, I think, like quoting and like some consulting companies that talk about pilot purgatory, I think we'll probably be right in the middle of that next year. So the challenge for all of us will be to move out of that into something which is really tangible and usable and ready to be rolled out.
I think we heard mentioned earlier in some session, if I remember, earlier was it Monday or whatever, about trustworthiness. I think that was a term used, and I think you're seeing some of the answers to trustworthiness here, and that's another reason I think this will grow very rapidly. I think we've seen the same thing. It has from last year, it's gone sped up. I mean, people are looking for pilots, people are hiring people are doing things to get after it, and it's moving really, really quickly.
One of the projects, product development projects I'm working on relates to business controls for European VAT invoices. So I'm evaluating using a side chain to basically capture a fingerprint of VAT invoices so that we can have another level of assurance.
I agree with all of them.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists. I encourage all of you to seek them out and ask them any questions. Thank you for attending.
Yes.